2G or 3G, Ghana is not working, and customer says, hey, it's a problem in the software. There's no problem, it's a connectivity issue, but you have to train people. So I think this is an investment, I think, which we have to keep doing it, and that's the job and responsibility of OEM, in my opinion. And we can share the cost, or initially probably OEM only has to invest in that.
I think it's time to sum it up now. There are a lot of reflections, ideas which have come up, whether it is in terms of optimizing inventories, thereby reducing the inventory carrying cost. But there seems to be a common agreement that yes, it is time to actually ensure that there is more money at the dealership to invest for the future and to see that the customers are satisfied and they come back and we are able to build the business. So with that, I thank all the panel members. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much to the eminent moderator and our eminent panelists. I request you to, after that photo opportunity, please stay back with us because we have to get the felicitations in order, and we're really, really grateful to the entire panel for such a wonderful session. So I'm going to start by calling on stage Mr. Sharad Gupta, partner High-Tech Motors, to come and felicitate Mr. Anuj Kathuria first, Chief Operating Officer Ashok Leyland. So I'm going to request Mr. Sharad Gupta. Bear with us. Eminent panelists, may I request you to please stay back for just a second. Mr. Sharad Gupta, not there. I'm going to then invite Mr. R.C. Rodriguez. There he is. No? Not there. Mr. Vignesh is going to do the felicitations. To Mr. Anuj Kathuria, Chief Operating Officer, Ashok Leyland. Call the others? Or yahi kar denge? So I request you to please present one to Mr. Rajan Pental, Senior Group President and Group Head, Branch and Retail Banking, Yes Bank. Mr. Rajat Mahajan, Partner Deloitte Consulting India. Ladies and gentlemen, can we have a big hand for our speakers, please? Mr. Rajiv Chaba, President and MD, MG Motor India. Mr. Yadvinder Singh Guleria. Okay, there he is. Mr. Rama Rao, former EVP Sales Marketing and Aftermarkets HD Trucks BCV. Mr. All right, Mr. Rajiv Chaba. Mr. Harish Suri, FADA Chairperson Uttarakhand. Thank you, sir. And Mr. Yadvinder Singh Guleria, SVP Sales and Marketing. Can we have a big round of applause once again, ladies and gentlemen, for the eminent moderators? Thank you, sir, for doing the honors. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we will slight change in schedule. We will move on to the next panel almost very swiftly. It's going to take under 2 minutes to reset the days. So I'm going to request you all to please bear with us and remain seated for the next panel. Our next panelists are already here with us. And Okay. So, ladies and gentlemen, the format of the next session goes like this. We will first have 2 presentations, and post the presentations, we will have the panel deliberations. So I'm going to be inviting the presenters one by one, and post that I will leave the stage for the moderator and the panelists to carry forward the conversation on the next theme, which is future-proofing auto retail. So I'm going to request you to please remain seated. This is going to be very interesting. We have Mr. James G. Wortman, the CEO of Australian Automotive Dealers Association, who's going to give us a brief presentation. We also have a presentation after that by Mr. Rakesh Batra, auto industry expert, also the moderator for this next panel. So ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to now be inviting our panelists on stage. I'll request the audience members to please settle in. Let me call on stage Mr. James G. Wortman, CEO, Australian Automotive Dealers Association. There he is. Let's welcome him with a big round of applause. Once again, welcome, sir. I'd like to invite CA Jatin Harjai, J. Harjai and Associates to kindly grace the stage with a big hand. I've been told he's on his way. He's going to be here any moment. Mr. N. Raja, DMD Toyota and Chairman Lexus India. Thank you for the applause. Mr. Naveen Philip, CEO, Popular Mega Motors. There he is. Well, welcome him, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Naveen Philip. Mr. Rakesh Batra, auto industry expert, our moderator also for this panel. Welcome, sir. Big round of applause. Mr. Sai Girdhar, Group President and Business Head, Consumer and Mortgages, Yes Bank. Mr. Sai Girdhar from Yes Bank. And Mr. Satyakam Arya, Managing Director and CEO, Daimler CV. Thank you for the applause. Now, may I request the esteemed members of the audience to please be seated. I think we'll have to take a break, ma'am. There's nobody there. I'd request you, ladies and gentlemen, to please take seats. We are going on to the next panel, and this is a panel which talks about future-proofing auto retail, something that we've come here to find solutions about. We've come here to find that silver lining. So I'm going to request you to please remain seated for this session. And most of our panelists are on stage. I've been told Mr. Jatin Harjai is going to be joining us shortly. And our moderators here on stage with us. Warm welcome, sir. So may we request the audience members to please take seats. What do you want to do? You want to start? Ladies there in the center of the room, may I request you to please be seated. Gentlemen, ladies, thank you. Please take seats for the session. We'll give it 2 minutes for all of you to please settle in. Please take seats. The panelists are already on stage, as you can see. I'm going to request all of you to please be seated as well.
Hello, sir. Jatin. So you are going to convey.
Ladies and gentlemen, I have been signaled to begin. I'm going to request you to please be seated and let me take the privilege of introducing our esteemed panel to you. The format, of course, as you know, is we have a few presentations which will be led by the moderator, and then he will lead the panel into a discussion. So I'm going to take the privilege of introducing our panelists. We have with us, seated on the dais, and you've met him in the first session as well, Mr. James Wortman. He's the CEO of the Australian Automotive Dealer Association. His expertise includes extensive policy and government relations experience with a career that specializes in automotive matters. He's worked as an advisor to a federal government minister as well as held several senior policy roles within a range of industry associations. He started in 2017 with AADA as Executive Director of Communications and Policy and has recently been appointed the Chief Executive Officer of the AADA. Warm welcome once again, sir. Thank you for the applause, ladies and gentlemen. Let me now go on to introducing CA Mr. Jatin Harjai, and he's partner and founder J. Harjai and Associates. He's a law graduate and practicing chartered accountant. Through his more than 15 years of career, he has become recognized for his contribution and expertise as a knowledgeable professional advisor and consultant in the field of financial consultancy and tax advisory. Shri Harjai is accredited trainer of National Academy of Customs and Indirect Taxes, Government of India, for GST training to be provided to trade and industry as well as GST officers of the central government. Once again, a warm welcome to you, sir. Thank you for the applause. Mr. N. Raja is the DMD with Toyota Kirloskar Motor and Chairman Lexus India with over 3 decades of experience in Indian automobiles industry. Shri N. Raja is the DMD Toyota Kirloskar Motor and Chairman of Lexus India. His areas of expertise include sales, marketing, after-sales service finance and other customer-facing functions. His skills include dealer management, business strategy, financial analysis, profit-oriented business analytics, and he is the chairperson for Economic Research Group, CIAM, which supports on the business forecast on annual basis for two-wheelers, four-wheelers, as well as commercial industry. So a warm welcome to Mr. N. Raja once again. And I'd like to introduce to you Mr. Naveen Philip, CEO Popular Mega Motors, the grandson of the doyen of automobile spare parts business in India, late Shri K.P. Paul, a postgraduate in business management from XIM. Mr. Philip started his career as marketing manager at Godrej and Boyce Manufacturing Company. He joined the Kuttukaran Group in 1997 and has put in more than 20 years guiding the business of the group. His forte is finance, and he's a member and past learning officer of YPO and also been a past chapter chair of YI and National Youth Affairs chair of YI. Please welcome Mr. Naveen Philip. Let me go on to introduce, ladies and gentlemen, now Mr. Rakesh Batra, auto industry expert, our moderator as well, an automotive industry expert and the former automotive transportation and mobility sector leader of EY India and member of Ernst & Young's Global Automotive Leadership Network. He has extensive experience of over 18 years in automotive consulting in India, US, Middle East, Thailand. Mr. Batra brings significant experience in the automotive industry in strategy, retail, supply chain and operations, and was personally advising vehicle manufacturers, dealers and the auto component manufacturers. Please help me welcome Mr. Rakesh Batra. I'd like to now welcome Mr. Sai Girdhar, Group President and Business Head, Consumer and Mortgages with Yes Bank. I'd like to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, that he comes armed with over 23 years plus of experience across credit cards, unsecured and secured lending products. He is a transformational leader and currently heads the consumer and mortgages retail lending and asset desk manager portfolio for Yes Bank. He also has got hands-on experience in all aspects of consumer risk management, spanning collections, credit and fraud control for both secured and unsecured lending. Besides being proficient in turning around business and managing efficient P&Ls, his area of management spans across product development, sales and distribution management and marketing. May I request you to please welcome Mr. Sai Girdhar, ladies and gentlemen. Warm welcome, sir. Mr. Satyakam Arya, Managing Director and CEO Daimler CV, Daimler India Commercial Vehicles. More than 20 years of experience across the automotive value chain and sector. Shri Arya took over the helm of Daimler India Commercial Vehicles in November 2018 to take Daimler Trucks activities in the strategic Indian growth market to the next level. He joined Daimler in 2009 as a member of the management team that built DICV's Indian supplier base from ground up. He holds a Bachelor's of Engineering in Mechanical Studies from CR State College of Engineering, Haryana, and studied Senior Management Program from IIM Kolkata. So that is Mr. Satyakam Arya, ladies and gentlemen, another of our eminent panelists. So with that, I'm going to leave the this whole panel, the presentations and the panel discussion in the hands of our able moderator, Mr. Rakesh Batra, a very renowned auto industry expert. Sir, may I request you to please take over. Ladies and gentlemen, a big hand for our moderator once again.
Thank you, ma'am. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this eminent panel that we have on the stage here, and very diverse range of experiences. I'd just like to set the context, for this panel discussion on future-proofing automotive retail. Just a brief presentation, after which we will also have Mr. James doing a brief presentation on the Australian Dealer Code, and then we will jump right into the panel discussion with the panelists. We will, keep about 45 minutes for that, 40 to 45 minutes, and then we'll have an opportunity to take questions from the audience as well, hopefully. Presentation is on. So the topic here today is around future-proofing of, automotive retail. I know there's been a lot of press, media over the last few weeks, and in fact over the last few months, going back almost from, August of 2018. But I think the key, impact of all of this, particularly on the dealer community who's here today, is around the financial challenges that this is having or creating, right? We've heard earlier in the sessions today as well about, funding of the dealer business, the retail business, with banks, taking a harder positions in terms of lending and lending approvals, both for retail and wholesale finance, asking for increased collaterals for funding of the business. There have obviously been large-scale defaults in some cases, which is causing a further stress on funding, as well as some of the dealers are impacted by a repayment crisis. And last but not least, some dealers have, also had to shut down. So certainly this is not a very desirable situation. And here I'm not even talking about the broader NBFC liquidity crisis, which, of course, is there, as a major national issue. With the impact on profitability and, thinning dealer margins as a result of over-dealerization over the last few years and expansion of networks, and B, with the volume and throughput going down in the last 8 to 10 months, this has, resulted in thinning dealer margins and not helped also by, higher inventories as we've seen, particularly over the last 6-8 months. There are a number of dealers as part of my former role that we used to interact with, and I think the voice that we are hearing across the networks and across the industry and across the brands, is pretty consistent in the pains that are being felt, from a financial challenge perspective. Liquidity appears to be, the single most challenge, and because of the large investments that have happened over the last few years, as well as the decline in volumes more recently, the question really is, are some of the fundamentals being ignored? And through the course of today and in a couple of the earlier sessions, we've heard different perspectives being thrown about the dealer business model. Is it based on net worth? Is it based on operating profitability? Or is it based on return on capital employed? Or indeed, is it based on, or should it be based on all three? So I think that's something we will pick up as part of the, panel discussion going forward. But clearly, I think there needs to be, well-defined financial performance metrics that, in addition to, the 5% profit before taxes that was being discussed in the earlier session, is how do we make the dealers future-proofed for, the coming years. Just an example here, again, based on case studies that we have done in terms of, and I think this, brings into perspective the whole discussion also on wholesale versus retail. In my view, retail is all, pretty much a consumer-led business, and we need to move towards a pull-based supply chain where as vehicles are being sold, they are being replaced. I know there was some mention about that by Mr. Kathuria as well in the transition that Ashok Leyland is doing to BS6 in the earlier discussion. But I think as an overall, vehicle industry and across the value chain, this is something that could help even out, the bias that happens towards the end of the month. And you can see here on this slide the sort of impact that leveling of, business, outcomes from week to week can have a difference as opposed to, having a large chunk, almost 50-60% being sold in the last week. Doesn't help anybody. Lastly, just touching upon the automotive dealer franchise environment, and I'm going to request James to share a short presentation of what the Australian Dealer Association has been doing in this space. But clearly, some of the key tenets around this would be looking at global best practices and laws that are relevant for the future of India as a top 3 vehicle market. As you know, we're already in the top 4, and in the next few years we expect or aspire to become in top 3. The automotive retail industry is highly complex with long-term and large personal investment of dealers. I think if you look at the entire value chain, OEMs go to the capital markets, Tier 1 suppliers all have access to the capital markets, but very few dealers or dealer groups have access to capital markets, and most of them are self-funded by dealer principals and their personal wealth and personal money. So, we need to take that into account as well when talking about the dealer franchise environment. Looking at consumer protection and regulatory compliances in a highly competitive industry, and lastly, mutual accountability towards achieving retail performance. And I think there was mention in the earlier session about protecting collective interests. So I think what we're really talking about here for the future is how do we protect the collective interests of the automotive industry, both from a retail perspective as well as from a vehicle manufacturer and supply chain perspective. With that, before I hand over to James, I'd like to briefly present one slide on the FADA objectives for this session, so that everybody is in the audience has an idea of what we're going to be discussing. So that one slide, please, on session 2. So while, they bring that up, I think there were 3 main areas that we were going to explore and discuss during this session on future-proofing. One is around the whole financial prudence of auto dealerships. The second is around tightening of banking and statutory norms. And the third is around the auto franchise model and the dealer agreement that I was just referring to as well in terms of, some of the key tenets. So these are going to be the key topics for the panel's discussion today and for your Q&A session that will, follow at the end of this. So with that, let me hand over to James, for a brief presentation on the Australian dealer code that the Australian Dealer Association is putting together in Australia. Thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. While I wait for the presentation to load, I'll just share with you that I appear here today rather sheepishly because I have not recovered from an event that happened 9 months ago when Virat Kohli and the Indian cricket team came to Australia and beat us comprehensively. However, I did read overnight that Steve Smith has just replaced Mr. Kohli as the #1 Test batsman in the world. Now, I don't know if everyone in this room is going to agree with me, but it'll help me to move on. But all jokes aside, on behalf of all of the Australian new car dealers, I'd like to express a great thanks for having us to come to this important event. Hopefully we provide you with some food for thought to help you in your businesses. Earlier, Patrick gave you a very useful presentation on the AADA and what it does for its members and where it came from. I'm going to specifically focus on the #1 advocacy priority our organisation has, which is the development of an automotive code of conduct. So why do we need an automotive conduct? What is an automotive code of conduct? What that is a bit of regulation that will better influence the commercial relations that franchise new car dealers have with the big corporate companies that they're franchised to. And why do we need it? Well, simply, in Australia, the system as it is currently does not work. We are governed by a generic franchising code, which puts us in the same basket as pizza restaurants, coffee shops and sandwich shops. We know that we're very different from those kind of operations. For one, dealers make significant capital investments in their facilities, in purchasing stock, in purchasing parts. We sell and service very technically sophisticated machinery. Our franchisors are simply amongst the biggest companies in the world. All of them are Fortune 100 companies and they have a great deal of power. And we need a code of conduct to better balance that power, or to remedy that power imbalance, should I say. The law as it currently stands allows OEMs to squeeze their dealers in a number of ways, and I'm going to touch on two of those elements, one being tenure. Over the years, Australia, if you go back 20 years, the typical franchise new car dealer would have been on what we call an evergreen agreement, perpetual agreement. That has since changed to a situation which I believe we have in India too, which is a system of fixed terms, unlike what they have in the US and the EU and Britain. Most dealers have about 5 years, but there are dealers there with 1-year agreements. But it doesn't matter what the length of the term is. There are many, many examples whereby a dealer has entered a franchise agreement, been required to undertake significant investment, which he has no hope of recovering over the course of that term. Similarly, with the exit arrangements, all of the power is with the manufacturer. All you need to give a dealer in Australia, if you're not going to renew their agreement, is 6 months. We had a dealer recently who had represented a brand for 40 years and was told one day, in 6 months you'll no longer be representing this brand. We don't think that's good enough. We don't think 6 months is good enough for a dealer that's invested potentially millions of dollars. We don't think it's good enough if you're going to be left with a facility that cannot be easily repurposed, be left with stock equipment that the OEM asked you to take on. You're going to be left with customers who might be serviced their car with you for decades, and you'll be left with a lot of employees. We just don't think 6 months is enough. So these are some of the reasons we've been pushing for this code of conduct. And the good news is that we've had a degree of success. And the reason we've had that success is by the fact that the political power balance has swung in favour of the new car dealer away from the manufacturer. And the reason for that is that if you go back to 2013, we had 3 powerful companies manufacturing cars in Australia, Ford, General Motors and Toyota. However, around that time, all 3 of them in a short space of time made the decision that they'd be pulling out. What that did was the political mindset in Canberra changed from one that thought the automotive industry was important to a mindset that said, well, the automotive industry is dead. Dealers, of course, knew better, and we took it upon ourselves to educate the political class that the automotive industry is not dead. The significance had merely shifted towards the retail side of things. To help convince the government of this, we created a tool we like to call Dealernomics, and you'll see a picture of it up on the slides. It's an online mapping tool which quantifies the economic benefits that dealers bring to Australia. It'll show you the economic contribution, it'll show you statistics like the number of people we employ, and it'll show you things like community contributions and sponsorship. It'll do it at the national level. We can go down and look at the state level, and we can even go down to the very local electorate level. And the idea there is that unlike the OEMs, we pay tax, we employ thousands, tens of thousands of people, and we make a lasting contribution even at the community level. It's thus important for them, for the politicians, to introduce legislation and regulations that protect those dealers. Our messages seem to have had an effect in Canberra. For one, we have recently received support from both the opposition party, the government of the day, as well as other regulators and government officials. And I'm pleased to say that as we speak, we're in a process with the government in which we are shaping regulations which will better regulate the relations between OEMs and dealers. What do we want in an automotive code? Well, I'll touch on some of the issues. We want a better link between investment and tenure. If you're going to ask your dealer to invest $10 million in a new facility, you have to give him a term in which he can not only recover that investment, but make a significant profit. We need better processes in Australia around warranty and Australian consumer law. At the moment, consumers have a lot of rights in terms of receiving remedies and replacements, but we're finding that the OEM's just not supporting their dealer in that process. We need a longer notice period for non-renewal, which I've discussed, and we are asking for a minimum of 12 months, but for that 12 months to be accompanied by a plan which exits the dealer out of the network in an orderly fashion. We also need reasons for non-renewal. In Australia, you don't have to provide the dealer with a reason when you're not going to non-renew him. We've had a dealer who got awarded a performance award from the OEM, and 2 days later, the same person who signed that letter informing him that he'd won a performance award has been told in 6 months you're no longer going to be a dealer. By giving dealers those reasons, they'll be able to challenge what they perceive to be unfair decisions in court. And then we also need better sort of protections for leftover stock and compelling OEMs to buy those back. I know one issue that the FADA is passionate about, which I think dealers all around the world are, is how do we remedy some of the excesses of the cyber car, or I think as you call them, the ghost car problem. It's an issue here, it's an issue in Australia, it's an issue all over the world. The question is, how do we fix it? We think it's part and parcel of the automotive code. Only when you have secure tenure and better protections around exit arrangements do we think dealers will be in a position where they can push back against unreasonable demands in relation to pre-reporting requests. Secondly, I think the OEMs simply have to change their culture in this regard. It has to be said, in Australia, not all brands partake in the process of pressuring dealers to pre-report vehicles. A number of the top-selling brands don't do it. And amidst the global downturn, I've been quite heartened in recent times to hear of comments, both at an international level and in Australia, of manufacturers saying that they're going to return their focus to profitability rather than this obsession with volume. We've made other progress in terms of pre-reported vehicles. We've had strong discussions with the body that represents the automotive manufacturers in Australia, and they've agreed that they're going to review their reporting practices, and we hope to see some changes to that in the coming months. But I'll finish up by saying that not all relationships between dealers and manufacturers are toxic in Australia. In fact, there are many relationships which have served both parties very well. But what we're trying to establish through the Automotive Code of Conduct is a common baseline which will drive behaviour by all participants in the automotive industry. And I will leave it at that.
Thank you. Thank you, James. So we're just going to, start with the first question here, and I'm going to turn to the banker with us on the stage. Sai, since the whole dealership business seems to have changed from location to liquidity. So let me turn it to you, Sai, in terms of, future-proofing the dealer business. What does a bank expect dealers should be doing more of, should be doing better, and how can you guide them on what they need to do to future-proof the automotive retail business? given all the challenges that we've had, and I briefly talked about in my presentation as well.
Thanks to FADA for the opportunity. I'd like to speak a little about the auto industry before I get into this. And what we as bankers see is probably going through its worst phase. We are in a trough, and we expect the sales to come back. We expect the industry to do well, and there is a lot of bad mood presently, and it seems to be percolating all over. The retail numbers are probably plus minus 5%. It's not as low as what we all talk of. So, some statistics of Indian economy: 22 people drive a car out of 1,000. We are a fast-growing Indian economy. I know today's rates are not reflective, but you don't look at last 3 months. You look at a period to arrive, a trend period to arrive at your conclusions. We have probably 50% of our population are adults. India has close to 10% of its population having an income of million and above, which means that as a model, vehicular sales has to grow. Be it two-wheeler, be it four-wheelers, be it any other, be it anything else. As an economy, there is no way but forward for us. And there is a push from the government about a 5 trillion economy, and I believe we can be plus minus, but we will most definitely be on a growth path. So from that perspective, I would like to start off by saying that I personally and my colleagues and most of the bankers think that this is nothing but the start of the next surge. We will have troughs. We've had it in 8 and 9. We've lived through it as a banker and as a dealer, and in this the relationship is very symbiotic. The dealer doesn't do well, the banker won't get his money back. I think that is something everybody here agrees. So the dealer has to do well, and we are more invested in the dealer than some of the other parties as well. To that extent, I say with a little humility that they have to do well for us to do well. Now we come back to dealer and how do we future-proof. The banker's partnership with the dealer is across 4 lines. One, as a support for him to sell his vehicle, any vehicle, as a retail finance provider. And I believe that is today going well. There has been tons of innovation which has happened around that, and the concept of finance is what has taken the industry up. It basically makes it affordable for the end user, and affordability has been a big driver of sales. It has been the truth for vehicle loans as it has been for, let's say, houses in India, and more so because these are slightly lower ticket sizes, and the schemes are, and at least in my 20 plus years, I have seen 75-80% LTVs today becoming 100% and 110%. Rates used to be 23% for an auto loan. Today, I think 9% is freely available across the industry. So the cost of finance, the availability of finance, and the medium of finance have all changed tremendously in the last 2 decades. And I think this will continue with more and more players getting into retail granular finance. The second relationship that the banker has with the dealer is as provider of term loans, provider of solutions on working capital, and as provider of tools like POS machines, supporting their staff, supporting the core banking of the dealership. And even in today's market, I think that is going extremely smoothly. And that is something which is growing because it's backed, it's a longer tenor loan, the rates are, I think, probably at the most conducive, and with what's happening in the Indian economy and with some amount of liquidity coming in, we expect rates to be benign for another 2 years at least. And finally, we come to the third, and which is slightly today's pain area, which is inventory finance. And what is it that a banker can do to support? See, fundamentally the banker's role is to help you buy the car, and when you sell the car to the retail customer, that money comes back to the banker. This is a principle of inventory finance. In this, if you are selling 300 cars, the bank will fund you 300 cars. If it looks like due to a festive period, it will move to 400, the banker will support you. And when I say banker, it could be one bank, you could bank with one, or you could have a conglomerate of 3 banks and 1 NBFC is helping you. Then they will help you take 400 cars. And if the sale drops to 150, the banker, by the very nature of the product, will have to bring it down to 150. We are a regulated body, so our regulations also demand that the finance available to that extent for purchase of cars is restricted to purchase of cars. And if there is any other purpose of money which is needed, for example, I'm putting up a new showroom, I'm putting up a new service station, I have some other expense like I want to revamp my entire sales setup. There has to be a separate facility of finance which is taken. It could be a WCTL, it could be a term loan, it could be any end-use based finance that you take slightly longer tenor. But if you are going to, in either knowingly or unknowingly, touch on your inventory capital to do that, then we are ourselves creating a mismatch in our cash flow and and in the tenor. So we are getting into a double whammy, and at that point in time, even if the sales dips minutely, you are going to have a cash crunch. And I think summarily this is what we are seeing, that there's a mismatch between the short term and long term, and that has primarily led to some of the problems that we've seen in the industry, and it gets accentuated when the sales drops.
But, sorry to interrupt. I think, this funding gap and diversion of funds from short term to long term, what exactly can dealers do? What are the one or two things that they should do differently, which they have not done in the past? I mean, this is fundamental, right? That you should deploy short-term funds for inventory financing and long-term funds for your investments and, growth capital. But what should they do specifically to address this problem?
See, three things. Wherever possible, people have to bring in equity. There is no substitute for equity. Incremental, even if you convert a short-term to a long-term loan by taking a further facility from an organization, the leverage that you get into, the interest cost in today's market will make it difficult for you. So prime first, try and get in equity and try and bring in that amount of reduction in your facilities so that you are able to, for the time being, push your business.
Very valid point, yes.
Yeah. There is no substitute for equity. Second comes the point, if due to some reasons you are not able to dispose your property, you are not able to bring in equity, which is in the short run not possible, convert your short-term loans to a long-term loan. If you have to pledge your property, get a loan which is probably cheaper today, and have some of your short-term facilities knocked off and move it to long-term. This does not reduce your leverage, but it brings parity to your cash flow. Suppose if you have 100 rupees of inflows every month, at any point in time your outflow cannot be more than X amount. If you cross that, then you are borrowing to do your setup. So the second immediate thing is, what is your cash flow? Do you have your inflows to meet your cash flow? Then accordingly ensure that your short-term, long-term is done. So that you are not under the pressure of that constant 60-day tranche period that I have to pay back the entire tranche. Convert it to a slightly longer. There are bankers who are willing to support you even in today's market. And you will be able to tide through this as and when market picks up. Probably you dispose of property, bring in equity and square off those loans.
Okay, what's the third thing?
The third thing is there is no substitute to cost management. You will have to become leaner and you will have to become fitter. The times have come where you have to ask yourself the tough question. I know I have people here and most of you understand, so I will not hold back punches. I don't know whether you need a 8,000 square feet showroom to sell 150 cars. I'm not too sure myself, probably it's my personal view. So your showrooms, your service station, the number of people you employ, your electricity bill to your total sale, every rupee matters today. Unless you are able to sit down and crunch every cost line of yours and make it on par with your requirement. I don't know what the requirement is, you know it better. And OEMs are responsible enough, if you sit with them and if you are able to explain it to them, they will. And I have started hearing feedback from places like Bombay, where dealers are letting go of big places and coming probably 2 kilometers in a prime locality and getting into smaller setups and vastly reducing their costs. So the third pillar for me would be a severe reduction on costs, and this will help you not only today, in the next 3 to 4 years when the surge happens, it will improve your profitability. And I think
when you're talking about cost, though, you're talking more about the fixed cost of the business.
I'm talking about both the fixed and variable.
Right.
Okay.
But the key thing here is impact has been because of the fixed cost, the showroom cost, etc. These are more, the fixed costs that need to be fixed. Let me, if it's okay, Sai, I'll move to Naveen. Naveen, you operate one of the, large dealer groups in the country. What's your perspective on future-proofing? You heard a banker's perspective, and he said 3 specific things. Equity, bring in more equity, convert short-term to long-term. Your brand has gone through a lot of expansion in the last few years. How have you managed it, and how are you looking at it in terms of future-proofing your business for the next few years?
How much time do I have on this?
3 to 4 minutes.
Okay. No, first I have to, taking from James' point, whatever I discuss here to all the OEMs, because I seem to be the only dealer on this dais, to all the OEMs, hope my dealership agreements remain intact going forward. And to all the dealers, this is not a dealer presentation, so I have not been coached by the manufacturers. So with both these caveats, I'll start off. I think the point that Sai raised, I think we should go back to setting up of a dealership. So when we go to set up a dealership, I don't think there's a particular norm which a manufacturer says that you should have you should have 8 cars displayed. Those things are there. But in terms of what is the sort of equity, what is the sort of debt that you have to take?
And 2-3 calculations are missed out, where we start off on the wrong footing itself. So when we start a dealership, most dealers would take a land either on lease or rent, or it's a land that's been lying with them. There is a pre-operative cost that comes into it before setting up the dealership itself. So that doesn't come out of long term, doesn't come out of working capital. A lot of dealerships, we would tend to take it out of working capital initially. Then we don't estimate the losses for the first 1 or 2 years of operation. So no dealership, earlier Rajiv had mentioned that MD Hector, they've started selling vehicles from day one and hence they're profitable. But that's something that is exception to the rule. So we don't have a viewpoint of the first 1.5 years. So there's a loss that is mounted in the first 1.5, 2 years of the dealership, which will again come out of working capital, because I don't think banks actually fund losses. So when you make the loss, you go back to the bank, either I have to bring it as equity or take it out of the short-term working capital. And dealers do take out money from the short-term working capital with the viewpoint that sales will go up and we will make a profit. No manufacturer is guaranteeing that. So I think that needs to be considered initially. Going forward, we run once a dealership is set up and it's moving smoothly, after every 2 or 3 years or 4 years, you've had 2 good years, 1 bad year, and then you're sort of steadying your boat, and then you have the new CI norms coming. Okay, so you suddenly have to transform the face of your dealership. And that costs about 1 crore per dealership, or 50 lakhs or whatever the case is. Now where does this money come from? Most of the dealership money that is made in terms of profits are usually sunk back into the business, mostly as stocks, if not as improvements to the dealership, either in terms of workshop expansion or sales expansion, smaller outlets, e-outlets, or whatever the manufacturer terminology is. So there's actually no liquidity in the dealership to actually go through the CI chain. And suppose you've expanded through 5 or 6 outlets, you actually have to make the CI chain across these outlets. So I think this, between the banker, the OEM and the dealership, unless there is a cohesive understanding as to how this is going forward, what are the next 2-3 years looking for, and it's not just a 1-year call, and it can't be a 1-year agreement. It has to be the next 4-5 years. When is the CI change coming? Is there enough money that has been made to make the CI change happen? What is the sort of working capital that's required? What are the pre-operative losses? What are the losses in the first 2 years? I think all of these needs to be considered. As of now, I think in the Indian market, it is not. And also the dealers are to fault because we are in the process of outdoing one another. Okay, so we would rather give discounts, sell more vehicles, not make money, because we would get the award at the end of the year and make that foreign trip, which I think are killing ourselves. I mean, we can afford that by not giving the discount. But we won't do that because it's a respect issue. It's a question of the manufacturer patting your back and saying that you're doing a great job. And probably that's why James said that somebody was patted for his great performance for 40 years but was terminated in 6 months. Obviously because there's no money left. Because I've already given discounts, sold 5,000 vehicles and become that. So I think a financial prudence from the side of the dealer is also required. But I think there should be a better understanding between the manufacturer, the dealer and the banker in this process.
So I think what you're clearly saying is, that you need to look at this dealer business, with a 2 to 3 year financial planning horizon, and that has to be not just as a dealer operator yourself, but in collaboration and in consultation, with the manufacturer, so that you can plan for CI changes or new model launches or new, expansions, whatever the case may be, and not only, understand what's going to be needed, but also you can plan the capital to deploy into those growth agendas. So, Rajasan, I understand, Toyota has run a very successful program over the last few years on long-term financial planning, for your network, and how, dealers or your Toyota dealers can understand what is the funding gap and then what they need to do to close that funding gap. I would request you to share with us, about this long-term financial planning program that you've put together and what are the sort of objectives and how is it playing out?
Thank you very much. I think if I have to talk about what we do, see, we are a small family, we and dealers. It's like 80 dealer principals. and the number of outlets they have. So what Philip San was talking about expansion, 4 or 5 outlets at a time, first of all, we don't allow it. There's no risk for them that somebody else will come and sit. So there's been a lot of discussions where it goes one by one. Clearly, for a year, if a dealer is looking at an expansion, we don't talk about a second expansion till that is completed and it starts making. All the expansion we are doing in the last 4 years has been more focused on the workshop rather than sales outlet. And we kick in the next workshop plan coming in only when the current facilities 80% level of utilization. So there's been total detailed planning, and relationship with the dealer is so sacrosanct that we look at saving him under any situation possible. Let me talk about long term, what we have done in the past. We have our Toyota Financial Services where we take the leverage and look at the gaps existing. We have been monitoring over the 5 years. I can tell you, I had gaps to the extent of 30% of the working capital, brought down to something like 5% this year, has been closely working with the dealer on covering the gap with term loan supporter functions. They have given collaterals, or in cases where the business is solid, we have worked even without collaterals to fund them towards the term loan, and over the last 4 or 5 years, it's been good because we are able to withstand the current big challenges that has come in. Take a case of a dealer X who's really going to sink. We have gone to the extent of negotiating one outlet being bought by existing dealer, and the dealer, we push him to pay some premium, showing the business levels accumulating over the 3-4 years profitability, and they pay upfront to this dealer who's sick to see he survives and come back as a way of long term for our sustenance of our dealers. We don't let go of the dealer, frankly, unless there is ethics or a big level of capital erosion. Coming back on, when we appoint a dealer, frankly, many, not naming anybody, but generally when a dealer, if somebody wants to become a dealer, many companies move in and say, yes, it's your business, you're coming in. But in Toyota, we make double or triple analysis on the viability of the dealership, look at the turnaround, the break-even. If we promise the dealer candidate 4 years, we are sure he'll break even in 3 years. That's the way we work on detailing before we look at the dealer operations coming in a new place. Coming on to working capital, that's one big area where we have been working very closely. As you know, we are very tight-fisted on it. In a year, twice, we set the limits for our dealers. When we set the limits to the dealers, it's not more into dealer calculations. We go up to all our finances. We have 6 of them, and all 6 are informed. This is what the limit that you should be giving in January, and we correct it in again after 6 months. So there is a very close working between us, financer, and the dealer. The dealer understands he can't get more money than that. Second, we monitor the working capital. Like when we set the limits, we are clear, like it is for a 21 days stock plus a transit depending on 5 or 7 days. We look at a market outstanding of 7 days in our calculation. This is what the limit that we work for the dealership. If this is the limit which we've given, we monitor very closely, monthly twice, believe me, first week and last week. There is a clear calculation done basis his stock in the system. Believe me, stock in the system. So that clearly avoids the pressure, even if my regional office is going to put on the dealership to show retails or whatever we call D&D and all things, because that goes out, you will get into a gap. So with that type of analysis, we do it first week and last week and give the details to the dealer, provide him a day to come back. There could be some government billings, 100 crores gone on credit, he gives the proof to the accountant, or money would have been in different account which flows into this account one day. And our norm is clearly 80% level, they need to adhere it. If not, the way we correct it is the dealership agreement moves from 3 years. It doesn't, from 3 years to 1 year, it doesn't mean that it's a way of termination. Wherever we have brought to 1 year, we have worked more closely with the dealer on these factors to push him back to 3 years. The incentivization, the rewards, the recognition, everything comes, it goes out if there is financial indiscipline in the dealership. So these are ways in which we are working. And of course, the last point is on cost measures, because we have clearly seen of late in the last 3 years, the tracking that we do, our profitability comes around 69% of our dealers' profitability is from value-add services and service. The sales is still 70% of our turnover, but profitability service and value-added services are the way where we are seeing profitability. We are working a lot. So clearly on increasing the GP and operating expenses reduction is one way I do. I'll take a minute more if you don't mind. We have started applying a Toyota production system in our workshops on cost cutting. Our pilot dealers are here. You can understand more from them. By visualization, I can talk an example of cost associated for servicing a vehicle. I'm talking about manpower, labor, I'm talking about electricity and related expenses have been in the range of 1200 rupees per car that is serviced. We attempted it first with visualization and we have moved it to 940 rupees. And the next stage of correction, we are hopeful we will touch about 750, which means a 500 rupees saving per car serviced in the dealership, and that dealership should be doing about all across about 300 to 400 hours a day. So this is the way we work very closely with them towards working on future protecting our dealers. And of course the last point would be on parts norms which we follow. Very clear, we sell one, buy one, and we also do it from the factory. So today if somebody asks me 100 filters, we don't dispatch to them because we will be holding at plant 100 filters. So that's the way we operate. You sell one, buy one, and we keep the inventories only 0.5, which means 15 days, and as of August end, our dealer inventory is not more than 21 days, and my parts inventory is less than 14 days. So that is how we closely work on. We have challenges. We are 24% down, so we correct our stocks rather than pushing dealers to take more cars. Thank you.
Thank you, Rajasan. So I think a lot of interesting aspects you touched on, in terms of the long-term planning program that you're putting together. Let me turn to you, Satyakam. And if I could just request the audience to kindly remain silent. We have another 15-20 minutes to go, and we would like to come back to you for some questions as well. So if you could just keep the background noise level a little low, I'd appreciate it. Satyakam, we've heard, from the passenger vehicle side, of course, the commercial vehicle dealer business model, I think, is quite different. We've also not seen the kind of expansion, that the passenger vehicle industry has been through over the last few years. But if you could share your perspectives around dealer business planning, and how do you look at it as a commercial vehicle industry specifically, and what dealers could be doing differently? You've had a different set of challenges, starting with BS3, BS4 transition, and then the axle loading norms being revised all of a sudden. So I think you've had a different set of challenges in the commercial vehicle industry.
Yeah, thank you, Rakesh. Well, you're right. We had different set of challenges, but eventually I think we lead to the same result. When it comes to managing dealerships from CV industry point of view, I think there's not too many differences. And when I look at the financial prudence part, I think all the discussions so far lead to some very clear conclusions. Better cost management is something you cannot emphasize again and again. And if I look at financial prudence along with working capital management, I'm pretty sure if you do analysis of cost at dealerships, you will find some dealers where this cost is up to 0.5% range, and you will also find some dealers where this is up to 3%. And we earlier talked about 5% profits. So if you just manage your working capital better, you could get up to 2% out of this piece. And frankly, this is not very difficult to do. So what I would vouch for is that we should all have better skilled people at dealerships who know how to handle working capital. This is a very important piece of your business, and this has to be done by trained professionals. Second, do we have proper accounting departments in dealerships? I'm not sure that every dealer has that. We were just talking about diversion of funds from long term to short term or vice versa. Those are not good practices because this will hurt you, if not now, some months later. Therefore, it's very important to have very robust and accounting departments which management has an eye on. These are two very important things. And the third thing which is related to CV more is cyclicity. How do we handle cyclicity in dealership? We are going through a crisis now, and I would really say that let's not waste this crisis. Let's develop all templates which we can deploy that we can bring down our costs and go through this crisis, and use those templates whenever we enter into the cyclical business again. So these are some of the important points from my side as far as CV industry is concerned.
Sure. Thank you, Satyakam. Thank you. Let me turn to Jatin. So, Jatin, I mentioned earlier about some fundamental financial metrics, right? In your view, you're a chartered accountant. What should the dealers really focus on as part of their business? We heard earlier that the business has moved from a net worth-based model to more of an operating profitability-based model. And there was Harish Suri in the last session who also mentioned that we need to look at return on capital employed and not just the capital employed in the operations of the business, but also in the land asset, that is part of the business. And I think that links back to the whole net worth element. So could you share your views on what or how dealerships should look at their businesses going forward from a point of view of financial future-proofing?
Hello, everyone. First of all, allow me 30 seconds just to reproduce my words about what my co-speakers has said. See, first of all, we have heard a lot about liquidity, that we are into liquidity crunch, liquidity is required. But what all of us said is, and the summary is, ultimately the profit is the aim, liquidity is not the aim. Make sure that you doesn't fall into the trap of over liquidity or over leveragation. So this is the first point which I would have to share with you. Second, coming on this particular aspect, what a particular dealer should do. One, optimization of whatever you have paid to anyone, including government. Let it be GST, let it be any other taxes, or any other thing, whatever you're paying to someone, it has to be optimized. That means you should extract the maximum possible benefit out of it. One. Second, what the others also said is management of working capital. In the last 1 or 1.5 years, I happen to be visiting so many balance sheets of the dealers. I was surprised that GST as an element. My core area is GST, that's why I'm discussing on that. GST as an element of working capital is sitting hugely in the balance sheets of the dealers. Even in the person sitting in this conference itself, I have seen that balance which goes till in cases of 5 crore, 10 crore and up to 15 crore. This is the amount which is sitting in the balance sheet, which is very well possible that you can manage it. So just think a scenario that on a particular day, you are having a GST excess or credit of 15 crore in your balance sheet. And if you plan it properly, let's say you realize 10 crore out of that. So probably the solution of liquidity gets also resolved. This is what a main criteria I would say one has to go through with review of whole of the balance sheet. Second. And the third one is, please be careful with the future vulnerabilities. So many law changes are there, as my past co-speaker has said, that whether you have a perfect accounting system or maybe a accounting department with you or not. So be careful on it. In last 2 years that the laws has already changed. And as I commonly say, GST is all about transparency. So many things are there. I don't want to discuss on this platform with the dealers. All you know what is there. So GST is all about transparency. Let me share you one more information. We all know that now state and central taxes department has already integrated as far as their sharings are concerned. Now the other integration is going on. It is on cards. income tax department is already having now started to have the information from your side, one. Second is transportation department. Transportation department is also getting the information from the same set of system. Third, the Department of Registration and Stamping, they are also getting the data from here only. The integration of all these departments has already been started. So be careful with your finances, be careful with your accounting. It should, as max as possible, it should reflect the reality, because all are going to be in the same loop. As far as economy, as you all know, you better know that how many cars are being sold or vehicles are being sold. But I'm very optimistic. Maybe it is a matter of time. Just reason is, we all know what is the relationship between US and China. We all know, and the ultimate suppliers would be either India and the Thailand. These two countries, I am very, very hopeful. Not just because of auto, but whole of the demand will be supplied from these two areas. So ultimately, I am very hopeful on the Indian economy.
Thank you, Jatin. So I think what's coming out of all the views that have been expressed is the need for a strong, robust business management system at each of your dealerships with clear transparency and visibility into where funds are deployed, where funds are being used, or where credit is sitting, as Jatin was just mentioning. That we're entering into a more, transparent world, and it's going to get more and more integrated. And, I think it's important, for you as dealer operators to make sure that there is similar transparency within your own organizations, and building a robust business management system, particularly, looking at the long-term and short-term financial planning, as was mentioned earlier, in terms of understanding what investments are going to be required from a CI perspective or a network expansion perspective, or, inventory funding perspective, looking out 2-3 years. Let me turn to James quickly. James, is there any, if you can just take a quick minute to share any perspectives on what Australian dealer businesses are doing in terms of, the financial management and financial prudence there?
That better?
Yeah.
There we go.
You're on.
Look, I suppose I'll frame it in terms of where we are as a market at the moment. We, like India, are suffering a bit of a downturn. We've had 17 months of negative car sales, and the dealers that are making profits are making, they're operating on very slender margins, averages of less than 0.5% return on sales. A lot of dealers making no money at all. So I suppose a focus during these times are on sort of, financial prudence, are around what we call in Australia the Big Four. Your Big Four expenses being employees, interest, rent, and advertising. And I suppose there are a lot of people are considering all of those. Advertising, for instance. Have you got a good balance of where your advertising is? Is there enough of it on the sort of new online platforms? Are you over-invested in traditional media? Those types of questions. In terms of employees, we've got a major problem in Australia with staff turnover, and it costs our businesses. So are there opportunities to upskill existing employees? Are there ways to better retain your staff? So those Big Four are the ones that a lot of our dealers focus on. But interestingly enough, we read a lot of what's happening abroad, and this sort of downturn seems to be global in nature. I read an interesting case study in the US the other day, a dealership in Columbus, Ohio, which sort of goes beyond just the Big Four, and it was considering every expense line. And they replaced bottled water that they were supplying to customers in the dealership with a sort of water fountain system, and saved $6,000 for the whole year. That's just one example. I'm not saying that everyone go out there and replace your bottled water. It's not going to be the difference between profitability and not. But that's just an example of how every expense line should be considered in the dealership.
Sure. Thank you for that, James. So moving to the last topic here, which is around, the franchise code, and we heard a brief presentation from, James earlier on about what the Australian industry is doing on this. This is an open question to, to the panel here, and if you could share your perspectives on, what we heard earlier today from James, and what do you think India needs, for the automotive retail industry, given that it's a, complex industry with large investments, requiring some, large amounts of equity and other capital to be brought into the business. Any perspectives that this panel would like to share on, an auto franchise specific code of conduct to drive, the regulatory environment for this industry. Naveen?
So I think a couple of points that most dealership entities would look forward, not just from the manufacturers, but trying to make a model code of a dealership agreement as such. So a couple of things. One is that in India, there's still, I think it's because of a British legacy, it's divide and rule. So dealers are easily divided and hence can be ruled by the manufacturers. That needs to change, and we need to look at multi-brand retail that will come. And from the manufacturer side, you've seen, apologies to both the manufacturers sitting here, it's not to anybody in particular. But I'm saying there's been thought process saying that you have to be the dealer principal for an X brand, and if you're taking a Y brand, you can't be attending those meetings. Which is, I think, across the world there's multi-brand retail involved, and it's moving towards that. So I think we need to look at that. Two is in terms of professionalization of the dealership. So while large dealer groups would make it professional and make sure that our brands are being managed by professionals, when you go to OEM meetings, it is sort of a mark of disrespect if the owner does not go for the meeting, however small the meeting may be or however large the meeting may be, which I think takes away the professionalism, and also the the dealer owner might not be well aware of all the facts and figures of the dealership. And I think the professional needs to go and attend those meetings. So I think these two has to make a change. So in terms of multi-brand retail as well as in terms of professionalization of dealership. And the last and the most important point, especially in this context, is having an exit for dealerships. So we build up large-scale infrastructure, huge manpower. The FM has announced that most industries under 400 crores would be on a 25% tax bracket. But if you look at any dealership entity sitting here, each one of us would have a turnover of above 400 crores. But if you look at the exit pattern, none of us can exit of it. So one of the mentions that Sai mentioned is you can make sure that your showrooms can get smaller. Even that can't be done. It's not an easy task to be done. Second aspect is if you want to exit, if I want to exit a dealership, how do I go about it? So I think these aspects should be addressed in the dealership agreement.
Rajasan?
Philip-san, totally agree with you, but let me explain you. It's a matter of trust between us and the dealer. I don't think even putting it in a dealership agreement or the law codes can help improving it. The relationship, as long as it's strong, it doesn't matter. Let me take our example. In our case, as long as our resources, funds, manpower, everything is clear with us, the expansions have never been a question in that form. Now coming to why we are stressing on DP, we have succession plan because I go by what is available for us globally. I'm not talking about India, but if I look at North America, the dealer family run business, first generation to second generation, the success rate is less than 30%. If I move from second generation to third generation, the success rate is less than 10%. So, considering all these things is where we are getting into succession planning, building a successor to our DP. At 60 years, we want our DP to be chairman, not run the dealership. So in such situations is what we want to identify. I'm not saying X has to be always. The family decides and give me one. acceptable to the company, we develop them over the period. At 55, we start the discussion. So 5 years, we develop them into our culture and move them. So these are the conditions which are why we are looking at. Frankly, where it is needed, we have gone and closed outlets and made dealership save 4 to 5 crores a year to make it viable. See, finally, the dealer has to live for me. Like for me, I can't name the dealership. One big dealer closed down. He had about 14 outlets, not related to our business. But it took us 18 months to 24 months to catch back on the volume, and I'm still struggling on getting back the customers to service. I would have touched about 75% of the original number after 2 years. So it's not that I can survive without the dealer and I can be authoritative and I can do anything with the dealer. So that is very clear.
Thank you, Rajasan. Satyakam, would you like to share your views? And I think you worked around the world. Any perspectives that you can share from a global practice as well? Thank you.
Well, I would strongly advocate for having that. Although I principally agree with Mr. Raja. Supplier, OEM and dealer, we are equal partners in the entire value chain, right? But if we don't have a framework to work on, this equal treatment cannot be ensured at every point of time. And I think that's why I would strongly advocate for having this framework. At the same time, I believe that this should be based on performance and nothing else. Right? All the contracts which are built on mutual performance only survive the test of time and the rest not. And I've seen this in other parts of the world, that while a framework is necessary to run the business and especially address unique situations, but it all then depends on how you take the relationship forward in long term.
And I think it's got to be about performance, certainly, but it also has to be about the collective interest. Like you said, you're all partners in the value chain, and it has to be about protecting collective interests because, even a dealer shutting down is not good for the brand in that particular city or in that particular market.
Yeah.
Sai, let me just turn to you for a quick, closing comment around your views as a, banking industry around this, franchise code of conduct specific for auto retail.
The first thing which I want to bring when we say future proofing is whatever we are discussing now, we are discussing what has got built over the last 3 to 4 years. None of it is problems which have got dug. We have a fresh one in our hands, which I want to place it, and we will all have to work on it together. The guy who's buying the car, the guy or the girl who's buying the car has changed. So today the customer that we have been used to servicing in the last decade or two is not the guy who's going to come now. They are looking at experience, they are looking at convenience, and they are looking at turnaround times. And I come from a generation where we used to wait, I think 14 years for our first telephone. I don't know how many of you here, it is called own your own telephone, OIT, non-OIT. Here it's all about instantaneous delight. So if you are not, if we are the front end, if the OEM, the dealer, the banker, if we do not work around giving the solution to the end user in real time and helping him make his decision, we will not be able to accrue value to a franchise. All three players, all three of us will struggle to accrue value because the end user is changing, his perspective of mobility is changing, and his expectations from all three of us are changing. So for me, when you say future proof, how are we going to service the next gen customer, the millennial, when he comes and says that I've already seen your car, I know everything about it, can I take the delivery and go? Can you ensure that I get my finance? Can you do my RC work? But I want the car today evening because I'm going out for a drink. How do you do that is the biggest challenge, and I think we all have to be in it together if we have to accrue value to the entire value chain.
Thank you, and with that, I think we can throw the floor open for some questions. Is there a microphone that's around? Okay, so if you could please raise your hand and mention your name and your company name, and if you can be very, very brief about your question, please. And we're only going to take questions. if you could please stand up so the panel can see you as well. Thank you. Yeah, it's working now.
Most of my questions are to Mr. Giridhar, since we are going through finance. So
well, one question. There's not one question, please.
Three quick questions. First one is, I'm not an economics guy, but I understand that interest rate is linked to inflation. Inflation has been going down in our country. MCLRs have not been going down. Repo rate has been going down. Why isn't, so I remember a time in 2010 I was paying 6% for my INF interest payments. Inflation has gone down below that, but still the interest rates have not gone down. So can you, there's another one.
I think let him finish this and then we'll pick up on.
No, you finish that, so that probably I can add.
Okay, fine.
Yeah, so the next one is, you mentioned about debt equity. What is the right balance as a banker you see in terms of working capital? A dealer should have his own debt versus equity, so that his equity gives him the best return, as well as the debt he stays under the 60-day period. And the third question is, a lot of dealers are facing problems wherein they have, I would not say fund diversion, but they've made mistakes by expanding, taking out money from their working capital. Now those dealers are stuck. Is there a restructuring program the banks could do for these dealers? We've been talking through FADA. There are a lot of dealers from the state where I come from who have been stuck because of some wrong decisions. So there should be a restructuring program. The dealer is good since 20 years. So why isn't there a restructuring program in our country?
If I could request you just brief one-line answers. We want to try and get some coverage and then you could always have a follow-up discussion.
See, the dealer is a trader P&L technically, right? So we're looking at a max lever of, I would say, 6 times. So to your net worth, I would be very comfortable with something around 4.5, because I think that's when you can make money. Otherwise, you are sweating it for your OEM and you are sweating it for your banker. You're not going to take home anything. My comfort would be around 4.5, but if you were to ask me, 6.5 can be absorbed by you. I have seen even 22, which was just waiting to burst, and it did burst. Second question, which is on restructuring. See, we're a regulated entity. There are ways and means in which this can be done. It's too big a topic to be discussed in short here. But in a going concern, the word restructuring is typically not used. You will have to move your debt from A type of debt to B type of debt. People are willing to come up with a collateral and sit with your banker. You will find that it can be done, and it is mostly done. On the first part, which is interest rates, see, it is not such a direct equation. I wish I was as competent to answer that question. I'm just a lowly retail banker, but the simple things that I can tell you, it is not the cause effect of interest rates is largely different. Okay, so that is something which I have seen interest rates come down from as high for the dealer as, let's say, 12% to 9% in the last 4 years. But your ability to transmit it to the customer is also a function of many things, and it's not just inflation. So as of now, I leave that, but I'd be happy to catch up over a cup of coffee. And considering I'm meeting you in the 4th week, I'll ensure I discuss this.
Thank you, Sai. Any other questions, please? There's one at the back. Can we have a microphone there at the back, please?
Good evening, everyone.
Thank you.
I have a question. Now that everything is digitized...
Sorry, can you just hold the mic a little closer? We can't hear you over here.
Is it better now?
Yeah, better. Thank you.
Yeah. I have a question. Now that everything is digitized, do dealers really need to worry about the process, the manufacturers, the way in which manufacturers are changing the buying process of vehicles, the recent move by Tesla Motors? So do dealers, my question is, do dealers really need to worry about this in the future? That at any point of time, the buying process is going to change?
Sorry, is your question about, how Tesla retails
like
vehicles?
They have curtailed down the entire staff. The buying process.
So I'm advised that this is better taken up at the next panel, which will be looking into, this specific question. If you could just kindly bring it up at the next panel. Thank you. Any other questions? Yeah, at the back. Any other questions? Wonderful. So with that, then we'll, call this session to a close. On behalf of myself and my fellow panel members here, I'd like to thank FADA for inviting us here. I think there were some useful points of view shared, across the panelists here. And I do thank the audience for a patient hearing. Have a great evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. And request the esteemed panelists to give the photographer a photo opportunity, and then please wait for a while for felicitations. I'm going to request Ms. Garima Mishra, Managing Director, Landmark Lifestyle Cars Private Limited, if you're there. Please join us on stage to felicitate the eminent panelists. Ms. Garima? Not there? Ms. Garima? All right. May I request Mr. Ramvilas Goyal, Director, Mahalakshmi Motors, if you're there with us? Mr. Pramod Gupta, Director, Matsya Automobiles. I'd request the eminent panelists to please stay back on stage. Mr. Nanavati is going to be doing the honors. I'm going to request you, sir, to begin with Mr. James G. Wortman, CEO, AADA. Eminent panelists, please stay back for the felicitations. And I'd request Mr. James Wortman to please accept his. Oh, he's there. All right, can we have a big round of applause? And now I request Mr. Ramvilas Goyal. Mr. Pramod Gupta is felicitating Mr. Jatin Harjai. And Mr. Goyal, may I request you to felicitate Mr. N. Raja. Mr. Baljit Bagga, Managing Director, Punjab Automobiles India Private Limited. There he is. So may I request you to felicitate Mr. Naveen Phillips, CEO, Popular Mega Motors. Ms. Seema Gupta, owner, Rajasthan Tractor Machinery, if you're there with us. Mr. Abhishek Agarwal. Seema ma'am is coming. I'd request you, ma'am, to please felicitate Mr. Rakesh Batra, a moderator, auto industry expert. Welcome, ma'am. Mr. Abhishek Agarwal, CEO, Premier Car World Private Limited. Joining us on stage? No? Mr. Rajiv Gambhir, Managing Director, DD Motors. Mr. Pramod Dalmia, Proprietor, Sikkim Motors. Mr. Dilip Patil. Mr. Ashish Bhamba. Mr. Amir Jatin Sheth. Mr. Sandeep Khair. May I request you, sir, to kindly join us on stage? There he is. To please thank and felicitate Mr. Sai Girdhar. Yes, Bank. Mr. Mansingh Pawar, may I request you, sir, to please join us on stage and felicitate Mr. Satyakam Arya, MD and CEO, Daimler CV. Let's have a big round of applause, ladies and gentlemen, for the eminent panelists and our moderator. I think that was a very, very enlightening, very interesting session. And I'd now thank our eminent panelists. I do assume the photographer will need another picture with he's done with done with group picture. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, eminent panelists, once again. Ladies and gentlemen, now we have an audio visual for all of you. I'm going to take a minute before I play that audio visual, and post that I'm going to be introducing and inviting Mr. Tobin Alexander, Vice President, Automotive Asia Pacific IHS Market, to make his presentation. So I'm going to request you to please stay with us. The panelists have left mobile phones, which, in case you remember. Can we have the audio visual for Uber, our partner? May I request you to please play the audio visual of our partner Uber on stage, on the screens?
Nothing happens. So, we move. We built Uber to deliver rides at the touch of a button. And in doing so, we changed the world. But then the world changed Uber to stand for more than a button. So, we move. And when we move, we start to see opportunity. Over here, around there, even up there. When we move, we help people move to new places in life, or just across town. 15 million rides and deliveries a day. Trips that create opportunity, to make surprises happen, second chances happen, resolutions and revolutions in ravioli con carne happen, and freedom. For people of all walks of life, in hundreds of cities across the globe. When we help people move themselves, we ignite opportunity. And when we ignite opportunity, we set the world in motion.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, a big hand for our mobility partner, Uber. Thank you so much. And I'm going to now take the privilege of introducing Mr. Tobin Alexander, Vice President, Automotive Asia Pacific IHS Market. He has over 30 years of sales, management and consulting experience focused on Asia's automotive, heavy equipment and industrial manufacturing sectors. He comes from the industry, having led the Asian operations of a leading US automotive components manufacturer before moving into technology and strategic consulting. Gentlemen, may I request you to please either take seats? Thank you so much. Now, moving on, Shri Tobin has consulted throughout the world at the enterprise, importer and dealer levels, providing him with a 360-degree view of best practices, technologies and competitive strategies, particularly for Asia. He's as comfortable engaging with C-level executives as he is working with partner ecosystems or regional field teams to plan and achieve strategic objectives. And we're going to now request him to make a very significant presentation in the interest of everybody in the room. So with a huge round of applause, ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome Mr. Tobin Alexander.
Namaste. It's a wonderful opportunity to speak with you today. Thank you, FADA and associated sponsors, for the opportunity to present IHS Market's view on the automotive industry, both in India and globally, as well as what we see going forward in the mid to long term. So today I'm going to be covering our view on what's happening in 2019, not only here in India, but around the world, our global light vehicle automotive outlook. We'll talk about the disruptions and changes in the Indian automotive industry, and if those are threats or opportunities. We'll be discussing the Indian automotive sales outlook and key trends, and then we'll be talking about various risks associated with that forecast. So we have a lot to cover and not a lot of time to do it, so let's get started. So I guess we're all aware of what's happened here in India in 2019. The good news is that India is not alone, if that's any consolation. Actually, there's been a free fall in 2019 in just about most markets around the world. As you can see, relatively flat in Japan, and a decrease in Korea. There's various external factors and political issues that are taking place in those countries that are causing challenges, as well as exposure to the various tariff and trade war areas. The biggest story up until recently, of course, has been the decline in China's automotive sales, a significant decline of 10%. Given the volume that China represents, that is a really huge impact as far as the global automotive sales number. We see relatively flat, actually about a 5% reduction in Australia and Oceania, which was referenced earlier. Slight gain in ASEAN, but basically flat and very low base to begin with. And then we come to India and the Indian subcontinent, where we have seen a 9% drop so far this year in 2019. Eastern Europe, Western Europe are flat. We've seen about a 3% decrease in North America. Again, with the volumes that represents, that has a significant impact on the total number globally. South America has dropped, and the Middle East and Africa has also dropped significantly, about 12%. So we've seen a decline globally, and this is generally as a result of regulatory pressures, tariff issues, various cross-border tensions, technology shifts, and fiscal and governmental actions within many of these countries. And incidentally, when I say light vehicle, from IHS Markit's perspective, light vehicle includes passenger vehicles and light commercial vehicles less than 6 tons. So it is not a pretty picture really anywhere globally. So, I think that's very important, that not only how India responds to this, but how we see the various industries and governments around the world responding to what we see as we all see as a rather significant drop in global markets. So now we'd like to talk a bit about our global light vehicle automotive outlook. I'm pleased to say that we actually see an improvement in the situation after 2019. Beginning in 2020 and moving forward for the next 6 years to 2025. Interestingly, we're going to see most of this growth in emerging markets around the world. In fact, the more developed economies will continue to have declines in aggregate globally. We'll be seeing a 15 million unit growth in total sales in the emerging markets, and as I say, a decrease of 6.5 million in the advanced markets. And if you can take a look at the specific countries, Japan will be relatively flat, South Korea as well, but we see China growing at a 4%. And by the way, these are compound aggregated growth revenue year on year, so this is annual growth rate. We're going to see 4% in China, 3% in Australia and Oceania. So for our Australian friends, we do believe that help is on the way. It's going to get a bit better. ASEAN is going to continue its growth. Western Europe is going to remain flat, but interestingly, Eastern Europe, which is really considered continue to be an emerging market, is going to grow in 6%. Happily, we see the Indian subcontinent growing at a 6% compound annual growth rate over these years to 2025. North America flat, South America a 4% growth. Middle East and Africa will resume a growth trajectory of 8%, and the rest of the world for a 2% CAGR growth rate. So from an 89 million total units sold in 2019, we see annual sales in 2025 at 103 million. So, in fact, we don't see this as a long-term, challenge and a long-term problem. It certainly doesn't alleviate the challenges and the pain that we're seeing now in the markets around the world. But we are, in fact, very confident that the industry is going to be growing going forward. One of the interesting things about this, and again with India and the subcontinent going to be growing to a 6% annual growth rate by 2025, I think this is really an interesting, area for us to discuss is how India and the Indian subcontinent have really developed as a market, as a global market over these various years. As you can see, in 2011, India wasn't even in the top 3 world markets. It wasn't in the top 5. India was 6, behind Brazil and Germany. By 2018, India was now the 4th largest automotive market in the world. And that's an extraordinary accomplishment. And in fact, I think that everyone in this room, deserves credit for significant hard work, dedication, flexibility, and fundamentally, taking an opportunity to grow, whether it be the government, whether it be OEMs, suppliers, and the dealers, here in this room. It's a significant accomplishment to grow, considering, that it fundamentally came from nowhere regarding the top 5 markets. What we see now in 2025 is that we are seeing India will become the 3rd largest automotive market in the world. Now, this is a little bit later than what we had previously forecast due to what's happening this year, but we are confident that this is going to be the reality of India's automotive market. This will create some significant changes, we believe, in the way that business needs to be approached, and it will provide both challenges as well as opportunities. I think one of the most important challenge, or the most important change, is that India will have to start developing a global player mentality, meaning that, there's really no secret now as to what will happen, and to the benefits of being a player within the Indian market. We've seen this in China. When China grew significantly to become the largest market in the world, many OEMs, global suppliers, various supporting industries began to focus and invest in China, creating opportunities for the local players, but also, creating more competition and requiring new thinking from that perspective. And we think that, in fact, that's going to be happening in India. So from, I guess you could loosely say, a provincial approach to the automotive business and the automotive industry here in India, to a global player with the challenges, the competitive pressures, yet the opportunities that entails, we feel is going to be a very, very important development, over the next 6 years as India, assumes its rightful place among the top automotive markets globally. So let's talk a bit about some of the changes and disruptions that we see that are going to be happening in India over the coming years. I think that there's a lot of discussion over most of the things that I'll be covering as to whether these are going to be damaging, if they're really going to be threats, or in fact, are there positive aspects and positive outcomes to these changes that we expect to see over the coming years. The first and I think the most obvious change that we're experiencing now and seeing many of the effects of is the move to BS6. And as everyone in this room knows, India is moving from BS4 to BS6, which is really extraordinary. No market, no automotive market, particularly the size of India in the world, has ever made that kind of a leap. It says loads about the level of innovation that we see with the industry here in India, the forward-thinking aspect of government planning, although I think we'll all agree that many times governments are not fully aware of the impact of regulations and these changes on the industry, whether at the manufacturer or the supplier or the dealer level. But it's an amazing, ambitious goal, and we are, in fact, I think, currently seeing a bit of challenge in the marketplace as a result. However, we, as you've seen previously, we think that India is going to be recovering next year from this particular challenge and the slowing impact of the move to BS6. Now, there's no doubt that a move to BS6 is going to create a higher ownership cost of vehicles. There's no doubt that it's has required, will require significant investments from OEMs, suppliers, and the dealer networks as well. And there's a good chance that fuel economy will be impacted, as well as the performance and drivability of vehicles in order to meet those particular standards and requirements. That's a challenge. It also impacts, of course, inventory and the ability to move the BS4 vehicles, through the inventory pipeline, and bring in the BS6 vehicles. And I think everyone's aware of that. We at IHS Markit actually, however, see this to be fundamentally a significant benefit for India's automotive industry in the mid and long term. It's going to allow industry here in India and for the vehicles to be equipped with the latest technology globally, among the best practice from a technology perspective. There'll be less pollution, which is obviously the reason for this to begin with. And, we all understand the challenges that India faces, as well as many other emerging markets around the world, in clean air and environmental challenges. This is clearly going to help that. And I think importantly from a commercial aspect is that it's going to open up significant global sales and marketing opportunities for the Indian automotive industry because, in fact, Indian cars then will be compliant with the most advanced regulations in any market in the world, whether that be in developed countries or certainly in developing countries. There'll be global standards. There won't be a question of, well, can we look at this particular market, from that perspective. It'll be more of a commercial aspect. And generally with the cost advantages that we see in manufacturing platform that we have in India, we think that the export opportunities are going to be substantial once the Indian vehicles have this type of capability and meet these particular standards. It's also going to, in our opinion, create a lot of more focus and more investment coming into India, particularly in the R&D areas and in testing centers, because, again, global manufacturers can leverage, the Indian market for testing that will be valid and will be applicable in their own markets and all markets globally. So from our perspective, the BS6, while certainly a challenge, the Indian automotive industry is up to that challenge, and we feel that it's going to be a long-term positive for the industry, both within India and globally. The next area of change and perceived threat is in the increase in the regulatory environment here in India. It's becoming more robust. Regulations and requirements around safety norms, road safety, overspeeding norms, cafe norms, the fleet requirements. All of these, frankly, are going to be challenging and, in fact, may lead to some models being stopped, for example, due to their non-compliance with safety regulations. There's no doubt that this is going to impact costs, particularly from an R&D perspective and at the supplier and OEM level. But again, similar to the BS6 situation, we see that this is going to be a net positive, and it's a great opportunity for India for the vehicles to be world-class, to be exportable, to fundamentally be in the same category as the developed economies where, frankly, that's where a lot of the opportunity lies in export of vehicles in India. So, again, short-term amount of pain. We are confident that India will be able to meet these requirements, and that in the long term it's going to increase business for you and for everyone within India. Now, the next area is something that's quite interesting. I think for the last couple of years, at least in India, there's been a lot of conversation and discussion about mobility as a service, ride sharing, and what threat would that be to vehicle sales, vehicle production, market size. Interestingly, what we see is that the market for ride sharing in India is very unique as far as filling a significant demand from a various population of riders. As you know, the lower income category of people normally use public transport, and they'll probably continue to do that. When you grow and you go up the income scale, then you're seeing more of motorcycles, and you go through the rickshaws or the cyclos, but then to two-wheelers and motorcycles, which is a significant part of the population of drivers here in India. But many of those people and many people who were on motorcycles really aspire to own vehicles, to own cars, four-wheel cars, to ride in four-wheel cars for all the reasons that we would certainly understand: convenience, safety, comfort, and to a degree of perceived affluence. Now, ride-sharing really fits that bill in India, and it fundamentally puts people who would historically be riding on motorcycles into passenger vehicles. And it allows them to leverage passenger vehicles and four-wheel modes of transport, before they're able to purchase their own vehicles. So at the end of the day, we see this as a fundamental net gain for the industry. In fact, we believe that mobility as a service and ride-sharing, ride-hailing will actually create an increase in car sales by 2022 annually of 700K additional vehicles. So at the end of the day, this particular development in mobility that many automakers, and not just in India, frankly, in other parts of the world have had a lot of angst around, we see this as being a very big win for India. Now, interestingly, in the developed economies and the higher cost economies, this isn't the case. It's not having such an impact because the major cost of ride-hailing to the consumer is the driver. And driver costs are extremely high vis-a-vis emerging markets in India, in North America, and Europe, and Japan. And so until we see ultimately autonomous driving coming in to those particular markets, we don't necessarily see ride-hailing or ride-sharing having the same significant positive impact that we do in emerging markets, and in particular India. So from our perspective, again, ride-hailing and ride-sharing and mobility as a service will offer greater vehicle sales and new business models and new business opportunities for the industry, from the manufacturer down through the dealers and service centers. Now, we're all aware, of course, and this was mentioned a couple of times earlier today, about the low car penetration, here in India. It probably comes as no surprise that car penetration is a function of GDP. What you're seeing here are GDP numbers for the purchasing power parity of GDP, so really the true GDP per capita number. And as we can see, India currently is really poised to offer significant growth, with only 35 per 1,000 currently, at a penetration level. So, from an OEM or a marketing director, or just from a growth perspective, I mean, these are dream numbers. Your peers in developed countries are certainly not seeing that type of a number. It is really more of a replacement type of a model for vehicle sales, and there's a significant used car market that also competes with new cars. So this is obviously a significant benefit and a significant opportunity for India that we see going for quite some time, certainly within the mid to long term that we're going to be discussing today. Now, another area that we believe is going to have a significant benefit to the Indian automotive industry across the board. Again, the entire value chain, including the ladies and gentlemen in this room, is a voluntary vehicle modernization program. Now, there's been no government announcement here in India that there's going to be a scrappage scheme, yet there have been whispers, these whispers growing a bit louder. We believe that, in fact, there's a very good possibility or probability that, in fact, a scrappage program will be put in place here. So, an end-of-life policy for vehicles it'll be the first time that this ever occurred in India. Certainly, it's a game changer. We believe that it'll help arrest falling sales, as the new reforms and regulations have led to increase in prices. So this has served as a kind of an interventionist balance measure that will help to offset the increase in costs and the market impact that we've seen on the various regulatory requirements that we discussed earlier. It's going to again reduce the pollution in India. It's going to increase safety because you have these vehicles that now are 20, 30 years old that you see here in India, off the road. And that's obviously a net, positive for the populace and for the environment. But obviously, it's going to drive new fleet demand, new vehicle demand, and frankly, as you'll see later, we believe that this is going to have a very significant impact on India vehicle sales. We're assuming that this will probably start to come into play and have an impact from 2021 going forward. Now, I happen to live in Singapore, which has a very famous scrapping program. In Singapore, you get a 10-year certificate of entitlement that goes with every vehicle. At the end of that 10 years, the vehicle has to be scrapped or a new COE applied, which is very expensive. So it's really a boom for the vehicle suppliers and the dealers and the dealer groups in Singapore, and we are confident that that's going to be the case here in India. So ultimately, a big, big positive, perhaps as big of a positive influence as any other change that we see on the horizon here. So let's get to our particular view on exactly what's going to be happening, here in India, over the next few years. Now, again, from our perspective, we're talking about passenger vehicles and light commercial vehicles that are less than 6 tons. And this has been discussed pretty much all day. The industry is going through a historic drop now for the reasons that we've discussed. Different structural reforms in banking have led to a tightening of liquidity in the market, and reforms like GST have disturbed the working cycle of really all businesses, leading to a showdown across the board, which of course leads to a reduction in demand for vehicles. The GDP growth rate, which was referenced several times today as well, has slowed. Lower spending in urban centers and a slowdown in rural growth obviously have crimped consumption across the board, not just with vehicles. Private investment's not really picking up, and government investment really is only driving the economy now. Uncertainty over demand pattern, after the BS6 implementation, exit of players like Maruti Suzuki from diesel cars, may be a deterrent to the growth of the Indian automotive industry currently. Anytime that you have lack of clarity or risk, generally that's going to result in a lack of growth or a lack in buying, both from a business perspective as well at the consumer level. So I think we all know and we understand what's happening. Now, there's also been a lot of intervention and changes within government policy, not just in India, but that's really had an impact globally. But in the midterm, we see a growing middle class. We see the low car penetration that I referenced earlier, and looking to focus more on profit. And the young demographics and strong macros due to an improvement in the macroeconomy here as driving sales. And again, relative to the scrappage policy that we expect will be in place by 2021, we actually see India growing
next year from vehicle sales at a 1.8% growth, but really starting to take off in 2021, 22, 23, primarily due to the fact that the BS6 impact will have been worked through, inventory will have been turned, and the scrappage policy we expect will be in place. So that, in our opinion, and hopefully that will make everyone feel a little bit more positive about what's going on, we do see India growth picking up significantly. There may be a bit of a drop around 2024, which would be due to more of a payback around the scrappage benefit and the growth there. But all in all, we see a very robust growth rate for the Indian automotive industry beginning next year and accelerating through 2025. Some other developments that just in general market that we see happening here in India. Most of the OEMs, such as Mahindra, Nissan, are working, to align with the vision of Indian government to make the EV and greener cars like CNG and hybrids. So I think everyone here understands that EV is a big, a big change that's going to be coming. More and more vehicles, more and more investment in that. We see entry of Chinese OEMs coming to India. Certainly, Great Wall and MG Motors are already here. We think that that's going to increase, which will probably create more opportunities for the dealer community in that regard, as well as competitive pressures as well. There's new innovations and business models, such as park and ride on electric scooter that Hyundai has introduced, with the electric scooter available with the car, so you can park and then get on the scooter. We see mid-size SUVs continuing to grow, and we believe that's really the most happening segment that's going to be taking place in the short to mid-term. Introduction of Tata Harrier, the MG Hector, Kia Seltos, all of these we believe will continue to define the changes in the Indian automotive industry. We believe that mobility as a service, in addition to creating an increase in vehicle sales up to 700K a year, will actually provide new business models and new business opportunities, such as vehicle by subscription. That's going to continue to be a development in the market. And we see, frankly, a stronger focus on the rural markets, the smaller cities in India. We believe that there's going to be more investment in dealers and coverage in that particular space. Just some trends as far as fuel types. We actually see gasoline increasing rather significantly from a market share perspective. Alternative fuel is going to, still at a low base, will start to grow. The biggest impact that this is going to have on diesel vehicles. For diesel engines to be able to meet the BS6 requirements and other requirements is a significant investment. And the diesel engines then will be a larger component of the vehicle cost. So diesel engines will probably only be available in the premium large vehicle market. And we see the smaller vehicles and the smaller passenger vehicles fundamentally moving to petrol. From a transmission perspective, we see a continued movement in India away from manual transmission to automatic transmissions for various reasons, not the least of which is for fuel economy and for emissions, but also just from a drivability perspective and a consumer preference. This is going to have obviously an impact on the suppliers. It's very difficult to retool a manual transmission factory to an automatic transmission factory, but it's definitely going to impact the feel and the mix of vehicles here in India, over the coming years. Now, no forecast is perfect. It's impossible to be 100% accurate. And so I would want to call out some of the risks and some of the areas that may impact the accuracy of what I've just shared with you. There may be potential reactionary measures at the city or the state level bans of particular vehicles or particular classes of vehicles. Increased environmental pressures may indeed change the mix and change the landscape of what we've just discussed. Uncertainty in policies with what's going on, globally with trade pressures, trade wars, and the like. That's very volatile currently, and that may very well change and impact our forecasts. In other words, geopolitical tension, whether that be wars or trade embargoes, etc., and abrupt price hikes without a stimulus to the automotive industry. So if the governments around the world, including India, don't provide the type of stimulus that we expect, then that may very well impact the accuracy of the forecast that I've shared with you today. So, thank you very much. We're going to be here the rest of the day, and our very capable analysts who were kind enough to provide me this information will be here to answer any questions that you may have. So thank you very much for the opportunity. I'm very grateful. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir, for that very, very important, pertinent presentation. I'm going to now request Mr. Sandeep Agarwal, Regional Director, West Bengal, to kindly join us on stage and felicitate Mr. Tobin Alexander for us, please. Can we have the felicitations in order? A big round of applause, ladies and gentlemen, once again for Mr. Tobin Alexander, Vice President, Automotive Asia Pacific IHS Market. Let's have a big hand. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Agarwal, for doing the honors. Thank you so much, sir, once again. Ladies and gentlemen, give us less than a minute, really, I promise, to just set the dais with, the dais is already set. We just have to get the placards.